What would you do if one woman truly believed she had the power to evict the President of the United States from the White House? It sounds like a plot ripped from satire, yet in one upscale neighborhood, this nightmare became reality. At the center of it all was a woman named Karen, the self-appointed queen of rules, the president of the HOA who thought she ruled over every sidewalk, every blade of grass, and every human being who dared to step out of line. To her, power was addictive, and she was about to take her obsession to the highest seat in the land. Karen had built her reputation in her neighborhood by handing out citations like candy. A garden gnome deemed unapproved, a lawn too tall by half an inch, a flag hung at the wrong angle, these were her battles, and she fought them like wars. Neighbors feared her, avoided her, whispered behind her back, but few dared to challenge her head-on. She thrived on that fear, mistaking it for respect. And with every victory, her confidence grew, until she convinced herself there were no limits to what she could control. It began innocently enough. She walked past a neighbor's television one evening and caught a glimpse of Donald Trump giving a speech on the news. His boldness irritated her, his defiance mirrored back something she despised. In her mind, he was just another rule-breaker, another stubborn man who thought rules didn't apply to him. But this wasn't a garden gnome or a mailbox color. This was the President of the United States, and Karen was about to declare war. She sat at her desk late into the night, HOA bylaws spread around her like a general planning a campaign. She convinced herself that the White House was nothing more than an oversized home in violation of community codes. Too many visitors at odd hours. Too much noise from rallies. Landscaping not in compliance with HOA-approved designs. She scribbled notes furiously, drafting what she believed to be an eviction notice. The next morning, she walked to the local copy shop and printed stacks of documents stamped with the HOA seal. Neighbors watched in disbelief as she marched proudly down the street, clutching papers that looked absurdly official. Whispers spread like wildfire, Karen was going after the White House. At first, no one believed it. But then she mailed the first notice directly to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, claiming the president had 30 days to vacate for failure to comply with HOA rules. The story might have died there, dismissed as the ramblings of a power-drunk woman. But Karen wasn't content with mailing paperwork. She needed an audience. She called an emergency HOA meeting, demanding attendance. With fiery conviction, she declared that the White House was in violation of multiple ordinances, and as HOA president, she was extending her authority to Washington, D.C. Gasps and chuckles filled the room. Some thought it was a prank, others thought she had lost her mind. But Karen wasn't joking. She brandished her papers like holy scripture, insisting that even the president himself was not above her rules. The meeting ended in chaos, but Karen emerged more emboldened than ever. That night, she called a local reporter, spinning her story as a citizen's crusade for order. By morning, the headline blared across the community paper, HOA President files complaint against the White House. It spread faster than anyone could imagine. Online forums lit up, memes were created, and cable news anchors chuckled as they reported on the bizarre case of a suburban Karen who believed she could evict Donald Trump. But as the laughter spread, so did curiosity. Who was this woman? How far would she go? And could this stunt actually disrupt something larger than her small neighborhood? Karen basked in the attention. For the first time, she wasn't just feared by her block, she was known nationwide. Cameras appeared on her lawn, microphones shoved in her face, and every word she spoke was amplified across television and social media. She claimed she was standing up for the rules, for order, for the silent majority tired of chaos. People rolled their eyes, but her audacity was magnetic. Then, she made her boldest move yet. On a cool morning, wearing her HOA blazer and clutching a thick binder of citations, Karen marched to the gates of the White House itself. Tourists gawked as she waved her papers at the guards, demanding entry to serve an eviction notice to the president. Security refused her, of course, but that didn't matter. Cameras captured every second, and the images rocketed around the world. By nightfall, Karen was a viral sensation. To some, she was a laughingstock, to others, a symbol of arrogance gone mad. Yet to Karen herself, she was untouchable, a woman destined to change history. She looked out her window at the reporters camped on her street and smiled. For the first time, she believed her power extended beyond her cul-de-sac. She truly thought she could win. But what she didn't realize was that the more attention she craved, the more enemies she was making. And soon, her little game would spiral far beyond her control. The White House staff had initially dismissed Karen's notice as junk mail. But when she appeared at the gates in person, shouting about bylaws and waving binders of rules, her antics forced officials to take notice. Secret Service logged her name, and a quiet file began to grow: Karen, HOA President, potential disruptor. Most saw her as harmless. A nuisance, yes, but nothing to take too seriously. That was their first mistake. Karen thrived on attention, and the media had given her a taste she couldn't resist. Soon, she was holding press conferences from her driveway, lecturing reporters about noise ordinances and grass-length codes as though she were testifying before Congress. She waved her eviction notice like a weapon, declaring she had legal authority to remove Trump from the White House. The more people laughed, the louder she became. And then came the rally. On a Saturday afternoon, she stood in the community park with a megaphone, announcing a Citizens' March for Order. Only a dozen people showed up at first, mostly neighbors curious to see the spectacle, but as word spread online, the crowd grew. Within weeks, Karen had attracted hundreds. Some joined for the comedy, some because they genuinely despised Trump, and others simply because they wanted to witness the madness firsthand. Karen fed off it all. She shouted about unlawful occupancy, about unapproved alterations to government property, even about landscaping violations on federal grounds. She blended HOA jargon with political rhetoric until it sounded almost believable. She wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant anymore, she was building a movement. But while she laughed in front of cameras, in private she was becoming increasingly unhinged. She stayed up all night writing letters, filing complaints, sending emails to lawmakers demanding action. She believed the nation would thank her once she restored order. Her husband tried to reason with her, her neighbors begged her to stop embarrassing the community, but Karen was beyond persuasion. She saw herself as a heroine. When Trump himself finally addressed the story at a rally, dismissing her with a smirk and calling her that HOA lady, Karen took it as proof that she was winning. "He's scared of me," she told her followers. "That's why he mocks me." The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. And in Karen's mind, her destiny was sealed. What she didn't know was that forces much larger than her HOA were now watching closely. Federal agencies, security analysts, and even the military began monitoring her rhetoric. Not because she was powerful, but because unstable people with microphones had a history of causing chaos. Karen wasn't seen as a threat to Trump's presidency yet, but she was quickly becoming a symbol of something unpredictable, something dangerous. And soon, her war on the White House would draw a response she never could have imagined. The turning point came on a crisp autumn morning, when Karen announced that she would personally serve the White House one final notice. This wasn't going to be another spectacle at the gate, nor a press stunt for cameras. In her mind, this was the decisive blow that would topple a presidency. She rented a bus, wrapped it with banners declaring "Rules above all" and "Karen's HOA Justice Movement." Her small band of followers piled inside, waving hastily printed signs and chanting slogans that sounded half political, half ridiculous. They drove straight from the suburbs into Washington, D.C., broadcasting live on social media the entire way. By the time they reached Pennsylvania Avenue, news crews were already waiting. The crowd had swelled. Some came to mock, others to protest, and a handful came out of morbid curiosity, just to see how far one suburban tyrant could push her delusion. Karen emerged from the bus in her blazer, binder clutched like a sword, eyes blazing with self-righteous conviction. She strutted toward the White House fence, bullhorn in hand, shouting citations over the roar of the crowd. Every word was captured on live stream, and within minutes, the internet was ablaze. But the Secret Service wasn't laughing anymore. Officers intercepted her, ordering her to stand down. She refused, waving her eviction notice high above her head as if it were a declaration of independence. Her followers surged forward, chanting her name, pressing against the barricades. What started as a joke was now looking dangerously close to a riot. The standoff dragged on, and tensions thickened. Karen shouted about bylaws, zoning ordinances, noise violations, twisting suburban rules into absurd charges against the president. Some in the crowd jeered, others cheered, and the cameras never stopped rolling. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A low rumble echoed through the city. Down the avenue, the unmistakable sound of engines filled the air. Military convoys, one after another, rolled into view, armored vehicles, trucks, and escort cars surrounding them. Soldiers dismounted, moving with precision, forming barriers between the White House and the swelling chaos. Karen froze. For all her bravado, she hadn't expected this. The laughter vanished from the crowd. This was no longer a viral sideshow, it was a scene that felt like the brink of a national crisis. Reporters narrated breathlessly as convoys positioned themselves. The sight of military presence in front of the White House was chilling. Some shouted that martial law had begun, others insisted the government was cracking down on peaceful protest. Panic spread like fire. Karen tried to rally her followers, screaming that the soldiers were afraid of the truth. But her voice cracked. For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. The soldiers ignored her taunts, their faces stern, their weapons slung. They weren't here to argue about bylaws. They were here to ensure the stability of the nation. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the chaos, Karen found herself trapped between the roaring crowd behind her and the silent, immovable wall of military might ahead. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment in excruciating detail. A woman who had once obsessed over lawn decorations was now facing down the armed defenders of the presidency. And the world held its breath, wondering what she would do next. The night that followed became etched in memory as one of the strangest episodes in modern history. Across every news channel, images of Karen standing at the barricade looped endlessly, her binder raised in defiance, her followers chanting, the convoys looming behind a veil of flashing lights. The media spun it in every direction. Some painted Karen as a lunatic, an embodiment of suburban arrogance gone mad. Others elevated her as a folk hero, an ordinary citizen daring to challenge power. Social media fractured into war zones of commentary, memes, and furious debate. And through it all, Karen fed on the attention like oxygen. But in private, she was unraveling. The weight of the military's presence had shaken her more than she admitted. For years, she had ruled her HOA through fear, but now she saw fear reflected back at her. Fear not of her, but of the forces she had awakened. Federal agents visited her home, warning her that further stunts could result in charges. Neighbors avoided her, afraid of being associated with the spectacle. Even some of her followers drifted away, realizing they had joined not a movement, but a farce. Yet Karen refused to back down. She doubled her live streams, convinced the government was conspiring against her. She spoke of secret codes, shadow laws, conspiracies only she could unravel. Her words grew wilder, but her audience grew too. Millions now watched, not because they believed, but because they couldn't look away. The climax came during one final march. Karen declared she would not stop until Trump himself acknowledged her authority. She gathered her dwindling but still passionate group and returned once more to the White House gates. This time, the military didn't wait. Convoys blocked the avenue long before she arrived. Helicopters hovered overhead. The city had prepared for her. She screamed into her bullhorn, binder raised high, citing violations that sounded increasingly unhinged. Her followers tried to cheer, but the energy was gone. The spectacle felt hollow, desperate. Reporters muttered that the end had come. And then, as if on cue, the gates opened, not for Karen, but for a line of veterans, ordinary citizens who had come to counter her madness. They stood silently, shoulder to shoulder, facing her with calm defiance. They didn't need chants or slogans. Their presence alone spoke louder than any words. Karen's voice faltered. She shouted again, but the sound was swallowed by the silence of those who had endured, who understood service, who represented the will of the people, not the rules of one woman. For the first time, Karen realized she was outnumbered, not by soldiers, but by citizens. The very people she claimed to represent had turned against her. The movement crumbled in that moment. Her followers drifted away, the cameras turned elsewhere, and Karen stood alone at the gates she could never breach. Days later, her story faded from headlines, replaced by other crises, other spectacles. But the image of her binder raised against the backdrop of military convoys remained burned into memory, a strange cautionary tale of arrogance colliding with reality. Karen returned to her neighborhood, but she was never the same. The HOA no longer feared her, they pitied her. The power she once held evaporated, leaving her a hollow figure wandering her yard, binder tucked away, ignored by all. And the White House stood untouched, its gates unbroken, its halls unshaken. The presidency carried on, indifferent to one woman's crusade. The people had spoken, the nation had stood firm, and the story of Karen became just that, a story, told with equal parts disbelief and laughter. But deep down, it also served as a reminder, when obsession blinds judgment, when arrogance grows unchecked, sometimes it takes the weight of an entire nation to bring one person back to reality. And for Karen, the fall from imagined power was harsher than any citation she had ever written.